Start streaming. I do. I do want to start streaming. Your event is starting. Okay. Okay. Yeah, baby. Marcus Conte reporting live like a mofo. Live, chilling like Bob Dylan. How you doing, man? Marcus Conte reporting. My guest. Stand by. Trying to pull this live stream shit off. Just be patient. Be patient. Technical difficulties. Please stand by. And my friend. Let me see what we got here. Marcus Conte reporting live. Trying to get this shit together. Let me know if you're out there, man. Just give me a thumbs up if we're streaming live right now. Vinny, give me a thumbs up, will you, mate? Give me a thumbs up, man. Thumbs up. I think we're live. Just give me 1 second right here. And I don't know why we're not. There we are. There's my brother from a different mother, Lee Camp. What's up, Lee? How you doing, man? How are you, man?
What's up? How are you?
Doing good, man. Doing pretty good, man. So what do you think, man? Bernie is like soft like a marshmallow. It's 2020. Remember 2016? It was like we were full of hope. We thought that we were going to get a fair shake. You think we're going to? Well, what's different this time? It's looking.
I disagree with you. I did not think we'd get a fair shake last time around. There's just. I mean, it's sad to watch it all happen again in slow motion, but I think people need to be ready for a million ways to Sunday. They're going to continue to rig this thing against Bernie Sanders, but really it would be against any true progressive that were to run for president. And we saw it in 2016, and literally the DNC ultimately said in court that they have the right to rig their primary. It is their God-given right. They called it their freedom of speech to rig their own primary, and they have not backed off that. So, in just today, a Politico article came out saying that certain DNC members were discussing bringing back superdelegates for the first vote, meaning they had now one of the only changes they made between this year and last time around is that they said superdelegates would only get to vote on the second vote in the convention, meaning you'd have to have a brokered split convention in order to get superdelegates involved. However, now they're discussing going back on that rule and getting superdelegates in the first voting to undermine Bernie Sanders. So I don't know whether that'll happen or not, but it's just yet another thing that they're doing to try and make sure a true progressive does not get into the White House.
Yeah. That was one of the things that we thought that would never happen the last time around. Is that rather than like in 2000, actually in 1968, there was a brokered convention, but the people voted for, I think it was Robert F. Kennedy, and it was Eugene McCarthy, right? And then Robert Kennedy got shot, and Eugene McCarthy. Then they threw the brokered convention. You remember that they threw the brokered convention to Humphrey. You remember that was the first time in recent history that the Democratic Party actually threw an election to someone who never got a vote. Humphrey never got a vote, and then he went on to lose to Nixon.
Well, and you remember that the people did rise up, and there were major protests outside of that convention, and people have to be ready to to make their voices heard if this thing is rigged in the same way it was last time. I mean, and a lot of people didn't pay attention to these news articles, but after the 2016 election, the truth came forward more and more. You saw the 200,000 that were purged in New York, likely Bernie voters. Ultimately, the New York Board of Elections had to admit in court that they had purged those voters, and nothing has been changed from last time. So they could do that again. I don't know if they will, but they could. So we saw that come forward. We saw that many of the provisional ballots in California were never counted. There's just a million tricks that are used to make sure. And by the way, if you have listeners, viewers in California, I did a segment on Redacted tonight about this. They have to make sure that if they are independent or they're quote unquote no party preference, first of all, make sure you're not signed up for the American Independent Party, because that's like a neo-Nazi party. And second, you have to demand the quote-unquote Democratic crossover ballot. So you have to say the words crossover ballot, because if you walk in there, they will give you a ballot that does not have the presidential choices on it. And even if you say, why don't I get to vote for the Democratic candidates for president, they'll say, oh, no party preference, can't vote on the Democratic ballot. But really, that's a trick. You have to say the words, I want a crossover ballot, or they will not give it to you.
How does it make you feel, Lee? How does it make you feel to know that we don't have fair elections? How does it make you feel when you see guys like Adam Schiff on the floor of the Senate and free and fair elections and the integrity of our elections and all the shit that we know? Yeah, I mean, you're touching some of it. And the exit polls, the exit polls don't match. So what do? They cancel the exit polls. The machines are fucked. So what do? You have teenage kids and having contests who can hack the machine, easiest. But how does that make you feel when you think like we live in a time that there is no democracy, there is no free and fair election. The whole thing is rigged by an oligarchy. How do we? I mean, does Bernie Sanders represent a change to that? What do you think?
Well, I think when you deal with what's actually possible in this minute in this country, Bernie Sanders is the closest you're going to get to somebody that could get into the office. I mean, I have done a lot with the Green Party. I've worked with them. I've worked with Jill Stein. I've had Jill Stein on back when she was running in 2016. So I am a big proponent of third parties, people outside the mainstream, and all that stuff. But the truth is, Bernie Sanders is the closest, quote-unquote, risk that the ruling elite have had to someone getting in the White House that is not a pro-corporate, pro-Wall Street, pro-war candidate. And that goes for Obama and Bill Clinton and George Bush, and all of those people were pro-corporate, pro-Wall Street, pro-war. And so there's a million criticisms of, you could have criticism of Bernie Sanders, and there are criticisms to be had that I think are legitimate. But in terms of something that could actually push the Democratic Party to be something more like a New Deal kind of party, it's Bernie Sanders is the only one that has proven he'll do that over a span of many years. Even if you wanted to say like, oh well, Elizabeth Warren stood up to big banks. Yeah, Elizabeth Warren also used to be a Republican. She also was a corporate lawyer defending Dow Chemical and against women who had breast cancer. She has had many different manifestations. She has not been the same person for many years. So if you want to look at somebody who's been standing for the same things for many years, I think that is true for Bernie Sanders. But in terms of how it makes me feel, of course it makes me furious. And I've been ranting and raving about it for years now, and hoping people actually give a shit. It's nice to see when people give a shit that we do not have a legit election system. A large Harvard study showed that we were the worst electoral system in the Western world. A large Princeton study showed that we are, without a doubt, an oligarchy. Very rarely does anything get done in this country that does not align with corporate interests. And if you look at the way, I think people should just look at the way other countries do these things. Like in other countries that have legit elections, exit polls are very important. Exit polls, if they vary by more than 2%, show fraud. In our country, not only do we have almost no exit polls, we have one company largely doing it, Edison Research, and they blatantly say that they connect the exit poll results with the computer results, which is the opposite of an exit poll. An exit poll should not take into account the computer results. It should take into account the exit polls. That's the whole point of it. And so they blatantly say they have basically rigged exit polls. And then when they do vary by more than 2%, which they often did in the last primary, we just ignore them, or New York Times calls it fake news or whatever. So we have a system that is outside of the norm, even when you just look at other countries that have legit elections.
Yeah. It's really crazy. I mean, I think look, we're at a point right now where the people are about to speak on Monday. Iowa caucus, right? Iowa caucus, a caucus. Hard to rig because why? Because people raise their hands and say, I want this guy, I want that guy, right?
Harder to, you're absolutely right. It is harder to rig, and so what was one of the changes that the DNC made after 2016? They actually decreased the number of caucus states. Right. They got rid of a lot of the caucuses. Iowa is still a caucus state, but several of the others that used to be no longer are. So basically, they took the thing that was harder to rig and made it easier to rig.
But my point is that the people are speaking. People are speaking right now, according to the fake polls, if we believe the fake polls. Bernie Sanders is ripping them. He's ripping it up in Iowa. He looks like he's going to win New Hampshire by double digits. California's coming in. There's only one poll in California, right? But the last time, again, in California, the people were still online voting, and they called the primary for Hillary Clinton. You remember that? 2 million votes mysteriously went uncounted. The thing that you said about signing up for the wrong party, provisional ballots is garbage. There's a million ways to cheat, but the point is that the people are speaking, and they're overwhelmingly picking Bernie Sanders. And I think you would agree that if we're so blessed to have Bernie Sanders standing on that stage facing off against Donald Trump, it is very likely that Bernie Sanders will win. Would you agree with that assessment?
I mean, well, polling has shown that Bernie Sanders has a better chance of beating Trump than the others. Donald Trump, in a now leaked recording that just came out a week ago, said that Bernie Sanders was the one thing he was worried about. He was worried that Hillary would pick Bernie as her vice president, and that scared him. So, Trump's no idiot. He knows that Bernie Sanders is the only person on the Democratic side that actually truly taps into the same anger that Trump is trapped into. Now, Trump lied to his base and told them he would help the working man and he would, end these endless wars and things like that. So he gets the same energy as Bernie Sanders, even though he does it through lies. And I think Bernie Sanders largely does it through truth, things he has stood for through many years. He is, because the Democrats have lost to Trump and lost to so many Republicans because there's very little space between what the corporate Democrats stand for and what the Republicans stand for. They can only point to they can point to lying sometimes, and then they can point to some smaller issues that are still important, but like gay marriage or something. But even those, it wasn't Obama that legalized gay marriage; it was the Supreme Court. So even on the issues that Democrats claim to stand for, like immigration, they aren't night and day. The more immigrants deported than ever before under Obama. Now, Trump is going to beat that record, but how can you possibly stand up and say, hey, we're the party that cares about immigrants, cares about refugees, but we're going to deport more than ever before? It doesn't, it doesn't mean anything to people anymore. So that's why Bernie Sanders is one that's tapped into actual energy as opposed to, and people, Bernie Sanders has people that'll knock on doors for him and stand up in caucuses for him. No one's knocking on doors for Buttigieg. No one's standing in the rain trying to convince people for Buttigieg. Come on, man.
Or Joe Biden. Joe Biden, he can't get 100 people in the room. You know what, Lee? You sound like a communist, though. You sound like a communist socialist because
goddamn pinko communist.
Because you wanna get the oligarchy out of your pocket. You sound like one of those like Occupy Wall Street guys in the park where you think that the oligarchy and the bankers are the problem. Isn't it like the deep state? Isn't it Comey and McCabe and the rest of Trump's swamp? I mean, he did drain the swamp. He gave us, Steve Mnuchin, and he gave us gave us John Bolton, and he gave us all, Mike Pompeo. These are good, outstanding guys, right? He drained the swamp, so he's doing his job. Right? And you want to go back? You want to go to communism? You want to go to communism and say that the bankers have something to do with the problem? Isn't that's fucked up, Lee?
Yeah, absolutely. What's hilarious is Donald Trump even ran ads when he was running last time saying bankers were the problem. He had an ad that was like, Goldman Sachs and all these, they run your lives and they won't run your lives when I'm president and all that shit. And then he gets into office and who does he put at the top of the Treasury? Goldman Sachs. Yep. Like, the idea that Donald Trump is again, I was arguing with someone on a TV show the other day who said, well, I think Donald Trump is authentic, and I was like, authentic? It's like, this guy's not against bankers. This guy is a corporate shill. Like, he's bent over backwards for bankers, giving them giant tax cuts. Right. That's not authentic. So, and you know what I talked about on my show, Redacted Tonight, that airs this evening, is the corporate debt bubble is larger than it's ever been before. Meanwhile, the big banks, like CEO Jamie Dimon of the Morgan Chase, the CEO, just said that. Chase, JP Morgan Chase. That's the CEO of that. He just said that socialism is the real problem. Well, where is the largest example of socialism than the massive bailout that we gave his bank, billions upon billions of dollars in the last crisis? All right, big banks benefit immensely from taxpayer dollars. They are the massive welfare queens of our system. And even Bloomberg News reported a few years ago that if you count the subsidies big banks get by the breaks they get from our central bank, from the Fed, they actually get equivalent to what their profit is each year. So without taxpayer subsidies, big banks would nearly not be profitable. And so they are the largest socialist entities in our country, or one of them, other than our military. And so for them to run around and be like, "Oh, socialism's the problem," it's like, screw you, man.
Yeah, but what happens, if you tax them, Lee, if you tax the corporations and you tax the banks, they're gonna take their business and go overseas. They're gonna leave. That's what people tell you. And isn't it true that they've already left? I mean, look, most banks, in my view, the banks are on life support already. They borrow money at 1% or 0% or negative 1%. They don't pay it back, and then they lend it to you at 23%, 27%, 35%, right? It's like they can't fail, but the American people can suck wind. People
should look into public banking. Public banking just got passed in California. Governor Newsom just signed it into law, and so they're working on creating the first public banks. And I know that might not mean much to people, but big banks, what they do is they take all of the community's money, they invest it in oil and weapons contracts. They do not benefit the community. Any profit is shipped away. They are not adding to communities at all. They take your money and gamble with it. And if they lose that gamble, we then bail them out. Public banking means that the bank invests in the community and actually benefits the community. And if you look at the banks that did not have trouble in the last crisis, one of the big ones was North Dakota, because North Dakota is the only state that has public banking set up. Now, California has legalized it, so hopefully there'll be public banks in Los Angeles soon. But right now, North Dakota is the one to look to, and they have had some of the sturdiest, crisis-averse banks in the country, because they're not these fucking profit-hungry parasites that gamble all this money, and then when they lose, turn around to the American people and say, "Hey, give us everything to fund us."
Yeah, man. So Bernie Sanders, I think you would agree that we've got one more shot. We've got one more shot. If Bernie Sanders can pull it off, if Bernie Sanders could get through the finish line, and I don't mean face off against Trump and have an election there. I mean, if he could get through the dirty Democrats, they're going to rig him at every step of the way. We know it. We're coming into a convention. If he doesn't get 50% of the pledged delegates, it's very likely that they'll stick a knife in his back and they could overturn the will of the people. Even if he gets 47% and Joe Biden gets 26%, superdelegates could come in and turn it in. But I think you would agree that if Bernie Sanders, the message of there is a problem of income and wealth inequality in this country, there is a need for universal single-payer health care, there is a need to squash student debt, to make college tuition free at city and state universities, to decrease the military budget, maybe cut it in half to stop the insurgency wars, raise the corporate tax rate back up to 34% and actually hold them to it. All of these things, not socialist ideas, but actual ideas that would turn the boat around, could create a new deal for the American people. If not Bernie now, right? If not Bernie now, who in the future? What do we have to look forward to in the future?
Let me say that I think all the things you're listing are kind of good steps towards evolving past capitalism, because capitalism at the end of the day, and look, there's a lot of different economic systems, and this just happens to be one we're stuck in that's destroying a lot of the world as we speak, but it has a gravity towards oligarchy, towards rule by an incredibly powerful elite. Even when you end up with restrictions, such as the New Deal, on these entities, they slowly break it down. They slowly capture the regulatory agencies, which we've seen a lot of recently, the EPA, the FDA. They slowly get owned by these corporate entities so that they are no longer, even the FAA, right? That's what just happened with Boeing. They were not actually held accountable for the actual testing and making sure they had safe planes. And so you end up with the capture of that, the capture of the court system. And this is a gravity of capitalism that puts profit over all else, profit over people, wealth over the welfare of average citizens. And so everything you just listed should be a stepping stone towards a better world, because we now live in a post-scarcity world where the truth is there is enough food and housing and wealth and resources for everyone if it was actually distributed correctly. But instead, we have a system that extracts it all. We have three people have the same amount of wealth as the bottom 50% of the country, while the bottom 50% of the country it says they can't afford a $500 emergency. Like, their life is ruined if they're hit with a $500 emergency. It's a completely, unequal and unsustainable system.
Yeah,
and so,
but Trump said that's the Mexicans. The Trump supporters say it's the Mexicans taking the jobs. It's the bottom sucking out. It's the immigrants and it's the bottom feeders that are fucking up the economy. It's not the. Right. How could you dare say that it's the banking industry, right? Isn't it? I mean, isn't it incredibly obvious when the corporate entities get 1 point, I don't know how many trillion in tax breaks, right? And that's money that doesn't hit the real economy. But we want to blame a bunch of pot washers, right? And they're the problem. The guy jumping over the wall to feed his kid.
Well, right? You're absolutely right. And what's amazing is these tricks, like you're talking about, blame the immigrants, blame sometimes black people, blame other countries, Iranians, Russians. These tricks have been around forever, right? Like, you can look back, and they were accusing anybody left of center of being Russian back in the 50s and the 60s. Martin Luther King was called a communist endlessly by our ruling elite. So these are not new tricks. They are very old tricks. They separate us. They divide us. They tell us, hey, don't work together as working people. Instead, point the finger at the other person. Point it at the person who doesn't have the same skin color. Point it as the person who has a different sexual preference. Whatever it is, just separate us. Make sure we're fighting each other. Sometimes they'll just do it with a type of job, like, how dare teachers get good health care? They're the problem. Like, telling us to hate on each other when, in fact, we should be united against the incredibly wealthy, against the power elite, against the media elite. In fact, we need to be united, and the tricks you're talking about are that you can read the playbook. It's an old playbook, and they use it well. And we've got to get past that. We've got to start working together, seeing past these differences, and really standing together. And also, what we spent a lot of this time here on is talking about how Bernie's going to get this thing stolen from him. Is people have to start planning for what the plan is when that happens. Because if you just sit there and then the day it happens, you go, oh man, that was crazy. That's not enough. Like, people got to start planning the actions, the protests, whatever it is that is going to be the response for when this thing gets stolen. Otherwise, everybody will be sitting there with the thumbs up their ass when the day comes, and it's coming. You know, the DNC is doing everything they can. Tom Perez listed his nominations for all the committees and the convention, and it's all the same trolls and Hillary bots and Wall Street goons. It's everything you see when you lift up a rotting log and look underneath. That's who he just nominated to run that convention. So people got to be ready.
Right. It's really crazy. I mean, we're living in crazy times. You want to believe that there is hope on this time around, you know. But I think it'll be. I think you might agree that by Super Tuesday, when California votes, when Texas, I think Virginia's in there, Massachusetts, some big states are going to all go on Super Tuesday. So we might not. I mean, that'll be 40% of the vote will be in. We might not have to wait quite as long to know we're getting screwed. Right? I mean,
who knows? I mean, they like. I think.
So what is the plan? What is the plan? What is the plan? Go and carry a sign outside the DNC and with a big FU on it and tape our mouths shut and put dollar bills on our mouth and protest and hold our breath like they did in 2016 and walk out so that they could take our seat and fill it with paid actors that hold signs. I mean, what is the
Well, I'll tell you.
Hasn't that been tried already? I mean, I'm just playing devil's advocate. What is the solution?
No. Listen. You've got good points, and I'll tell you one thing. I think the French are showing us the plan. I mean, the French have shown a lot of unity in these latest protests. They have the longest running strikes in recent history, and it's things like the metro union over in Paris and the electric union workers stood together, and the electric workers have been cutting off the power to the rich neighborhoods and turning on the power to the poor neighborhoods where they've had their power cut because they can't pay the electric bills. And they've been standing with the people. And I think, it doesn't always work, but it's sure as hell a lot more powerful when people are united like that than when, you got 25 people with a few signs out front of the convention.
Right. Wouldn't you agree that the leader should also lead? Wouldn't you agree that if Bernie Sanders would reach into his pocket and grab his testicles and say, you know what? We're done with this. Hey, and what has he got to lose? He's 79 years old. Come on. Face it.
Well,
he's 79 years old. Grab your balls
I agree.
And say,
a lot of people left him around. A lot of people were trying to get him to run on a third party, like when it was stolen from him. And I think that if he did that, it certainly would be incredibly powerful. If you look to past examples in U.S. history, the alternate parties that succeeded were usually begun by someone who is a very powerful and well-known leader who was in one of the main two parties and then left and started something more powerful outside. So, it definitely could happen like that. Hey, man, I'm sorry I got to run. I really enjoyed chatting with you. I have a new book out that people can check out that has some of this stuff. It talks about voting, talks about elections. Also, talks a lot about the $21 trillion of unaccounted for adjustments at our Pentagon, which came out recently, which is incredible fraud against the American people. All the money we need to do anything you've ever talked about, healthcare, infrastructure, everything. It's all plenty in the military budget, but and that $21 trillion. Anyway,
what's the name of the book? What's the name of the book?
The book's called Bullet Points and Punchlines. Got an intro by Jimmy Dore and a forward by Chris Hedges. And people can get it at leecampbook.com.
All right. Sounds good. Thank you so much, Lee. Thank you, Lee Camp. Lee Camp. Peace out, Lee. We got Lee Camp in the house, man. Lee Camp. So, Lee Camp is still talking over there. So, Marcus Conte reporting. Oh, shit, man. Fucking dope, man. We got that Lee Camp on the phone there. Lee Camp on the... So, what do you think, man? That's my... Look, I'm all Bernie right now. I'm all Bernie. I'm a socialist, man, right? That's what I am. I'm a socialist. What's up, Sterling Price? What's up, Lee Veltman? What's up, Vinny, man? What's up, Vinny? How do we do, man? How do we do? Lee's a good guy, man. Lee is a statistical anomaly. He's got all these stats in his head. He knows this shit inside and out, man. He's been around the block for a long fucking time, man. And you know what I'm saying, man? So I don't know, man. I don't know what to think. I think that I brought Lee on because Lee is still fighting the good fight. He's one of the few guys out there that he looks into the camera and he says, "This is what time it is." And it's not necessarily about Bernie or, it's not about that. Certainly not about the Democratic Party. It's about us versus the oligarchs. It's us versus the 1%. That is the message. And if not Bernie, who is what, is basically what I'm trying to say. So anyway, whatever, man. Call me a socialist 500 times, man. I'm in the camp with I'm in the Lee camp. So that's all I really got right now. I just wanted to put that on the record, get Lee on the record there, and tell us what time it is. So I guess I'll take you out, man. Let's take you out with a little shit while we're here, man. While we're here. Oh baby, oh yeah, la 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 la, oh, yeah. Come on, Bernie. Bernie, bro.